I'm Roger Martin. I like working with executives on helping them make better strategic decisions and then writing about it.
Great. So you made a huge difference in the way senior leaders think when it comes to difficult problems. So what's the difference between the traditional decision making and the design attitude to decision making?
Well, traditional decision making has become ever more analytical over time, so that often now executives think that unless they have statistically significant data, they can't make a decision. They would be being kind of very sloppy if they didn't have statistically significant data. The problem, of course, is that there is no data about the future. And if the future's going to be different than the past, then if you use data from the past, you will never make that change. And this is where I think design and the world of design has something to offer the world of management that is just hugely important, because designers are more about taking little snippets of thoughts from the past, things they've seen, it may be deep interviews they've done, but that's not statistically significant, and on the basis of that, imagine possibilities. That's their thinking process. Their thinking process isn't first about how do I make sure I'm making a rigorous decision. Their first thought is, what would be a cool way to solve this that perhaps has never been done before in this instance? Maybe it looks like something that's a little bit, that's in a somewhat similar context, but not exactly the same. So they imagine possibilities and then are willing to say, rather than saying, I'll only take action when I'm sure, they'll say, why don't I just prototype it? Why don't I do a low resolution prototype and see if this makes any sense? And then they build towards a solution. And their rigor comes not from analyzing past data. Their rigor comes from prototyping, listening, improving, listening, improving, listening, improving. And that iterative process delivers, in my view, as much rigor. But what it does is open up the possibility of something new that isn't based on extrapolating the past data into the future.
So you talked about possibilities, right? You talked about prototyping. So one of the big things in design is I don't just go down one path, I have several possibilities at a time. Managers are very uncomfortable with that,
yes.
Right? It's about, I make a decision, I execute. So how's that different? How as a business person can I prototype in parallel? Isn't that a waste of time?
No, I mean, the way I think about it is business people are inclined to go find a pair of handcuffs, put them on their arms by only following one idea, and then complaining when that idea doesn't work out. It's like, my idea doesn't work out. This is so unfair. It's, no, you put the handcuffs. You put the handcuffs on. A designer is more inclined to say, I'm not going to handcuff myself. I'm going to imagine possibilities and keep a number of them alive. I may start with the one or two that I think have the most promise, sure, but I won't forget 4 or 5, because if the prototypes for 1 and 2, let's say, for sake of argument, don't turn out so well and may teach you, you know what, the thing that I thought of as maybe my 5th favorite possibility actually might be better than 1 and 2. So I think they still keep them in mind, even if they do some prioritization. But business people, to too great an extent, say, what's the one answer? Now let's work like crazy, invest like crazy, and then give that to the customers when it's done. And then when the customers say no, they feel sort of like the world is unfair, and what went wrong? I was rigorous. But you were rigorous in a way that made new possibilities less likely to happen.
So when you have several possibilities, alternatives, you're actually managing risk, right? Because you're not going down one path. So it's actually a very strong strategy to manage risk. But it does require that we explore several possibilities very quickly with very, rough thinking and very low fidelity prototypes. And most business people are not comfortable with low fidelity prototypes. So what's the advice you would give business people to actually start thinking alternatives, start thinking low fidelity prototypes?
My advice is to have a different discussion with your customers. So I think what you get now is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So companies are inclined to say we can only give something to a customer when it's perfect. And they send that message to the customer. So the customer expects it to be perfect. So if it's less than perfect, the customer is mad. Think about that in contrast with the software industry, right? The software industry makes a practice of sending junk out to customers for them to figure out what's wrong with it. But it's because they have beta customers who they have the relationship, the dialogue with that says, this is junk, but here's the deal. You get it first before everybody else gets it, and you get to help us fix it, so you're cool. And all the beta customers say, yeah, that's cool, I'll do that. And so the relationship is just a different relationship from the start. And I think more companies should do that, which is to say to customers, here's our first take at it. We have enough reasoning to think something about this you'll like, but we're looking to you to help us. Because I think that actually builds a stronger relationship with consumers. I mean, there are in the software business, as you well know, Alex, people are proud to say, well, I'm a beta for Adobe. I mean, and they ship me stuff that I see before you see because I'm cool. Lots of companies just don't avail themselves to that because they've have this very formal relationship. My stuff is perfect. You will like it. Yeah, that's a restriction.
So this idea of quick prototyping and testing makes a lot of sense, right? That's how you reduce the risk. But it does mean transforming some business processes substantially. Maybe keeping the rigid processes to run your supply chain and factory. Are you starting to see companies that are doing that, low fidelity prototypes, putting those processes in place to explore alternatives?
Yes, but it's happening relatively slowly. I mean, the good news for the companies doing it is not everybody's following them immediately, so they can have advantage. I mean, I think in due course it's going to become ubiquitous. But as a friend of mine, Delane Hampton at Procter & Gamble, explained to me once, she did a study of how long it takes to make a managerial transition from an old way of doing things to a new, and her view is 30 years. Because she studied a bunch of them, and I think we're in the middle of a 30-year transformation from these rigid, I'll do it in the lab and get it perfect and then launch it, to this rapid prototyping thing. And we may be, I don't know, something like 10 years into a 30-year change cycle. I think within 20 years, that's what everybody's going to be doing, but it sure as heck isn't that yet.
So one of the myths is that we need to find the creative people, and this is about the creative genius, right? And you have done a great job in helping people understand, this can be taught, right?
Yes.
Is what you've done for a long time. So what's your message to people who still believe that, coming up with great alternatives and possibilities, that has to do with creative genius?
Yeah, I think it has to do with practice. It's the same thing I say with strategy, right? People say, hey, I'm just not a strategist. And I say, actually, I've never met a born strategist. The greatest strategists I've met, when I scroll back and listen to them talk about what they've done, they've just practiced more than anybody else. And that's why they're great. So I'd say the same thing about creativity. That having been said, I think there's a lot of work that people need to do on one particular aspect. So in the modern world of business and management, most of the education is education on what my friend Hillary Austin calls the manipulation of quantities. So thinking, in grade 1, you learn what? Addition. That's a way to manipulate quantities to get a productive outcome. Then when you're good at that, you do subtraction, and then multiplication, and division, and then algebra, and calculus, and fluid dynamics if you go to be a chemical engineer. All of those are modern techniques for manipulating quantities to produce something for you. What Hillary says, and I believe, is that there's another entirely different skill set, which is appreciation of qualities. So being able to appreciate small qualitative differences in whatever you're looking at. So she would say a chef can look at a piece of meat on the barbecue from 10 feet away and determine whether it's done enough, not done, or the like, whereas me, I'd have to cut it open with a knife and look in. So, or a wine connoisseur can blind taste test and say, well, that's a 85 Bordeaux, not an 86. Those were two very different years. That's appreciation of qualities. And to express your creativity in the modern world, you need to have both an ability to manipulate quantities, right? Crunch the data that you have, and appreciate small differences. What did that customer sound like? Did she really have passion when she was talking about that, or was that sort of, well, because I asked the question? That's qualitative. You cannot measure that quantitatively. And so I think we have created a managerial class that has one extremely strong arm that's been built up on manipulation of quantities, and one arm that they can't barely raise to their shoulder level, which is their appreciation of qualities. If you want to become a great strategist, great at creating possibilities, innovative, building new business models like you teach them, Alex, they're going to have to work on this other arm, this other muscle, to have that full suite of creativity. It's doable for anybody who works on it, but if you don't work on it, what are you stuck with? Crunching data from the past, which will never help you invent the future. Never. I think that a great strategist is one who helps his or her company invent the future, create a future that does not now exist. The only way to do that is to be able to imagine new possibilities. And so I think you have to have that designerly capability to look at various things from the past. It's not as though these possibilities come from nowhere. It's like Johnny Ive and the iMac. That was considered unbelievably breakthrough. It's like, where on earth did those colors, tangerine computers and grape computers, where? Well, it turns out he used exactly the same color palette that the Savoy camera used 20 years before. So this designer observed the world and said, well, maybe cameras and computers might have this similarity. Is that data that you can crunch? No. But it's something that you can imagine. So what I think you need to do to have great strategy is to be able to pull pieces together from things you've seen out in the world and imagine possibilities. So that's absolutely critical. And then the next piece that's absolutely critical in making strategy better, I believe, I used to believe that you have to reverse engineer your possibility to say what would have to be true and then test those things. And I used to believe that testing was you go out and get the data. Now I believe testing is rapid prototyping, because with the rapid prototyping, you can make something true that wasn't true, right? Like if you went with your initial idea out to the market, they may say, if you're asking me yes, no, the answer is no. And so you say, that was a bad idea. If you take a designerly approach, their first answer, you're not asking them yes or no. You're asking them, hey, what do you like about this or not like about this? And they say, well, I don't like a whole bunch of this, but this aspect of it I really like. So that you build on that and you build on that. And in some sense, you turn what appears to be a no into a yes over time. So it's really those two things. Better tools for imagining possibilities, and then better tools for making those possibilities a reality.
So, two last questions. One is that, you talk about possibilities and we need to prototype, right? Mm-hmm. Rough prototypes to start and test that and learn. Now, very many people in innovation, when they present their ideas to leaders, they're afraid of presenting raw ideas. What's your advice to them?
Well, I understand their fear, because the perspective from those leaders is often, I want a right, perfect, finished answer, and so I think in many respects it has to start from the top with the leaders inviting just tell me what's on your mind. Let's leaf through it. But there, I've come to believe that there are two very fundamental kind of business leaders out there, and one I think is getting less and less capable in the modern world. And so the two kinds are what I call set piece leaders. And for them, they want everything to be like a Shakespearean play. Everybody's got their lines. You know the lines in advance. It is corporate theater, right? And so the meeting would be about this great product that we've already vetted and is perfect, and they're going to present it to me, and then I'm going to say that's a great product, and they're going to say this is a set piece kind of thing. And then there's another kind of creature, executive, and that's the read and react executive, where they just say, "Hey, let's start talking, and let's see what happens as we discuss it." I think historically there have been more set piece CEOs that have arisen through organizations because they appear organized and structured, and there are no surprises except when they get disrupted by somebody from the outside, and then they say, "We couldn't have done anything anyway," right? They make excuses. And the world is heading in a direction that I think the read and react CEO is going to be the winning variety of CEOs. And that read and react CEO would be much more likely to say, "Hey, Alex, tell me your 5 things you're working on. Let's just roll them around and see if we come up with some even better ideas in the meeting." And they're not guaranteed that there will be better ideas, but they don't mind. They're just like, "Hey, that's life." So I think we need more read and react executives to foster more of this sort of designerly approach to strategy.
Sounds like Jeff Bezos would be a CEO who kind of fits that, saying to his shareholders, Amazon is the best place in the world to fail.
Yeah.
How many CEOs do we hear saying that?
Yep.
So is that is that the direction?
Yep, absolutely. And the guy I worked with for so long, A.G. Lafley, would have been exactly that sort. And so people loved working for him, partially because it felt like working with him, because that's the way it felt. It felt to him. You didn't have to have everything buttoned up before you came to him with something, and he was a great marketer. So you could come to him and say, "This is what I'm thinking of doing on Pampers," and and he'd say, "Well, here's what I like about it." It'd be like a prototype, right? "Here's what I like about it, but here's where I think you could use more work." And they'd go away saying, "I love my boss," right? Because he would be helpful. Whereas many bosses would be like, "That's not done yet. Finish it. Get it perfect." And the person is like, "Well, I kind of thought I was done. I did the best job I can." What exactly do you mean by getting it more perfect? And so, yeah, I think there's just a big difference between the two, and it also then relates to how they relate to their boards, right? There are set piece boards and read and react boards. The vast majority are set piece. I'm going to present a perfect answer, which you're going to nod like some kind of trained seal, right? And that's why most boards don't add much value. They're not structured in a way to add value.
Okay, one last question. Jump back a little bit because I think it's important. Is that design processes are not linear. Strategy design, in the changing world, or coming up with new innovations, new business models, they're not linear, and companies hate things that are not linear. Maybe 1 or 2 tips. How can a company deal with this, or even people, the people doing this, creating this, how do they deal with a non-linear process?
Well, part of it, yeah, I'm going to talk about this in my talk later this afternoon, is companies have to wake up and say, and recognize the world is not linear, right? So companies try to be linear in a non-linear world. What I believe is the metaphor we use for the corporation is a machine, right? It's a machine where if you press the gas pedal, the car goes faster. It's a complex adaptive system. And so nothing is linear in a complex adaptive system. It would be nice if it were linear, but it's not. And so my advice to companies is on this one is just wake up and look at the world around you and ask the question, what of that thing that you're looking at is linear? Okay, none. So why do you think having all linear processes in your corporation will make you fit, right? And the answer is you'll be unfit for that environment. And as we know, things that are not fit, it's not, it's survival of the fittest. That's not the strongest. It's the survival of the entities that are most fit for their environment. And the linear, set piece, data-based corporation is not fit for the earth that it inhabits. So that would be my advice. Wake up.